I think one of the things that helps us is that we've had a history of entrepreneurship at Babson since its founding back in 1919. Our founder, Roger Babson, was a famous stock market trader, and he basically was always good at picking out opportunities. He picked the selection of the campus here by taking the train as far west from Boston as he could, walking 5 more miles, and buying up as much land as he could. And if you're familiar with this area, this is some of the most expensive real estate in all of the U.S., so he did pretty well. Since then, we've had entrepreneurs graduate from Babson since day one. Daniel Gerber, who's founded Gerber Baby Food, graduated here in the very first class in 1920. And then since then, we've had Arthur Blank, who's the founder of Home Depot, Ernesto Burrelli, who's won the America's Cup selling race a couple times, and also is the longtime CEO and founder, or president of his family company, Serrano, and just a number of other entrepreneurs. And so back in the 70s, we decided to make a strategic change, and we decided we were going to put our focus on entrepreneurship. There was other entrepreneurship programs at Harvard and places like that, and we had our own, but we decided to put all our focus into that, and we've continued to execute on that since that time. And I should point out, we've been number one for 18 years, and that's as long as they've rated this category. So in my mind, we've always been number one. Because of that reputation, because of the faculty that we're able to attract, we're able to get the students who are really, really interested in creating the next great enterprise. And so you're in a dynamic environment, dynamic ecosystem, if you will, of really bright kids trying to change the world, and we're just here to try to help move them along. One of the things that's changed more so over the last 20 or 30 years is just the awareness of entrepreneurship. When you and I were kids, we probably thought about growing up and being the next great football player, the next Tom Brady, or next great pitcher like John Lester. But kids today think about entrepreneurship. And that started to happen in the 70s and 80s when a lot of large companies started to lay off our parents. And if you would go back to our parents' generation, people who are now 60 or 70 years old, they joined a company and they expected to be there their entire life. That contract between company and employee kind of broke down. And so people said, if I'm going to be successful in my career, I have to create my career. I can't join a company and expect to climb that ladder. I'll probably join many companies, and at some point, I'll probably want to create my own enterprise. The other thing that I think's happened over the last 20 or 30 years is we've seen a lot of great role models. You know, we see Steve Jobs, we see Bill Gates, or more recently Mark Zuckerberg, going out and creating companies and changing the world. But not only that, becoming really wealthy, becoming great philanthropists, and it seems like a lifestyle that's very appealing. And here at Babson, one of the things that we do is we focus on cases of students who've graduated in the last 5 years. And so our students can see themselves as that next entrepreneur. Whereas maybe it might be hard for you or me to see ourselves as Bill Gates because, oh my God, Bill Gates, wildly successful. Or Mark Zuckerberg, wildly successful. And although they're at the very end of one extreme, a lot of entrepreneurs create great businesses, do $100, $200 million a year in revenue, pay themselves and their employees well, generate really nice returns for their investors. And so we have this whole system of role models that make entrepreneurship seem accessible and something worthwhile doing. The change in technology is making entrepreneurship more accessible than it ever has been. So nowadays, you can start a business with just a computer and start building your product or your prototype by outsourcing the actual production to factories all over the world. And so it costs a lot less today to start a business than it did 20, 30, or 40 years ago. And also what you'll see is because of the role models I was talking about earlier, people will be starting businesses at an earlier age than they have been historically. If we go back over time, the average age for starting a business was about 35, 37 years old. I think what we'll see in the next 20 to 30 years is that that age will continue to go down. There will still be the really young kids like a Mark Zuckerberg who start when they're 18 or 19, and there will still be the old timers. I always like to say Colonel Sanders from Kentucky Fried Chicken, but I think on average that age will get younger and younger. And I think they'll create businesses that are more global from the get-go than has been the case historically. Here in the United States and in many countries, you started a business with a very local focus because you had a market that you could identify, and the market was large enough to create an interesting business. But today, because of technology, because of email, because of social media, you can start a business that spans across borders almost immediately. I don't know that it is. I think one of the things that entrepreneurs believe is that it's always hard to get funding. I have entrepreneurs coming in my office today that are just as frustrated trying to raise money as they were 20 years ago. What I do think has changed is that individuals are more likely to invest today than was true 20 years ago. And when you think about the earliest stages of a brand new venture, you probably only need $20,000 or $50,000 or maybe $200,000. Or if I'm looking in a country like Vietnam, you may need only $1,000 or a couple $100. And the best place to go get that money is from what we call the 3Fs: friends, family, and fools. And that is more available today because people are more attuned to entrepreneurship and more willing to write a check with maybe the dream that you will be the next Mark Zuckerberg. As you get up into the more professional investors like the angels and the venture capitalists, I'm not sure that that's any easier. One thing that we've seen over the last 20 years is that venture capitalists have gone later and later in the funding food chain, if you will. They're not making $1 million investments like they were back in the 80s when I was a venture capitalist. They're making $20 or $30 million investments. And so that means the company is much larger and already has customers and is really just trying to scale to become a very big company. Angels have kind of come in and filled that gap to make the $1 to $5 million investments, but they're not as easy to find. Angels don't go out and advertise, hey, I'm looking to make investments, as is the case with venture capitalists. The only exception to that would be that there are some formalized angel groups like Harbor Angels and things along those lines. But you get in front of them and you will not think it's easy to raise money. They'll ask you lots of tough questions and you have to be very, very well prepared. And it's just like my high school dating career. For every 5 people I ask, I'm going to get 5 no's. But if I keep asking, maybe somebody will say yes. Asia is a very fascinating example of a liberalizing economy. Things are getting much better in Asia. The government has made creating businesses much easier than it has been in the past. And so what you have is a populace that's getting wealthier and is creating all kinds of pent-up demand. Now people are thinking about electronics, whereas in the past, in some of the countries, they were probably just thinking about getting enough food on the table to survive. And so as this general wealth increases in these countries, you're seeing entrepreneurs identifying opportunities to serve this demand, and they're creating new businesses to bring this to fruition. The first and most important thing is they need to have a passion. We're going to spend a lot of our lives working. And when you think about the work life today, it's not the 40 hours that maybe our parents did. It's more like 50 or 60 hours. And so you need to have something that really gives you energy, something that you can really love and nurture and build upon. And that passion may be in retail, that passion may be in technology, that passion may be in medical devices. But understand what it is and then think about the opportunities around that passion. The other thing I think is really important is that entrepreneurship isn't an individual endeavor. When you read magazines, when you see news articles or news pieces on the TV, it always highlights that entrepreneur, the Bill Gates or the Mark Zuckerbergs. But we forget that there was a team behind these people. And so one of the important attributes that an entrepreneur needs is the ability to network, the ability to understand his strengths or her strengths, and the ability to see her or his weaknesses, and then to find team members that can compensate for some of those gaps and then build an organization to pursue that opportunity. And then the last thing I think you need is knowledge. And what you often see is that entrepreneurs are creating businesses in areas where they have some level of expertise, some level of fit. And there was a Nobel laureate from Carnegie Mellon University who said that Every one of us can build up 50,000 chunks of knowledge, but it usually takes sustained effort and time. And he used to say it used to take about 10 years. And once you have that knowledge, you can see things that other people overlook. And when I think about it in an entrepreneurship perspective, you can see patterns and things happening out in the environment and how these patterns come together to create the basis of new opportunities. There are more, but I think those are the three most important. I think the basics of entrepreneurship research are pretty much the same today as they were 25 years ago. One of my colleagues who passed away about 4 years ago, Jeff Timmons, came up with the Timmons model of entrepreneurship. And the basic components, here's an opportunity, here are the resources that you need, here are the people that you need to execute on it, is still the same. What I think you have seen in entrepreneurship research is a more detailed understanding of these components and placing these components into slightly different contexts. The very early research in entrepreneurship was focusing on what are the traits that make somebody an entrepreneur. Is it going to be a male? Does he have a certain ethnicity? Does he have a certain type of religion? What's the difference between a man and a woman? And what makes one person an entrepreneur versus another person? And what we found out of all those years of research is that you can't really pigeonhole an entrepreneur. Almost anybody can be an entrepreneur. It depends on the context. It depends upon the situation in their life at that particular point in time. It depends upon the people that he or she's around. And so now research is moved away from what are the traits that define an entrepreneurship, but what are the things that make somebody a better entrepreneur. And there's a really interesting stream of research that I've seen over the last few years focusing on the passion that drives somebody to do something. And so I think, again, this gets back to what's changing with young people is that they're not only trying to create a business to generate money, but they're trying to create a business that helps them reach some self-actualization, to help them achieve that feeling of accomplishment as well as hopefully a financial reward. Yes, we do see Silicon Valley type of ecosystems opening up in lots of different countries. But I think sometimes we fixate on the Silicon Valley model a little bit too much to the extreme. We've seen a lot of great companies birthed in Silicon Valley, a lot of great companies that have gone on to change the world. But I think what every region needs to focus on is what is the expertise of that particular region. Silicon Valley is high tech. You have Apples, you have Facebooks, you have companies along those lines. If I think about biotech, there's a lot of ecosystems that are very supportive of that. San Diego, Boston, the UK. And then if we think about retail, Chicago's been a very great ecosystem for creating new retail concepts. And so when I talk to policymakers, and we do a lot of that here at Babson because we have a study called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor that looks at these issues, I tell them, don't try to create the Silicon Valley. You don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the universities. And so when you're trying to create an ecosystem, whether it be a Silicon Valley type of ecosystem or not, you need to look at the infrastructure that your region has in place. What are the type of graduates that are coming out of your universities? What types of companies are already existing in that particular region? Because those are the spawning grounds for the next entrepreneurs. What they're learning in university is what they're going to apply when they start a business. What they're learning while working for somebody else is basically going to drive the types of businesses that they create when they leave that company and start their own enterprise. And so whether it's high tech, whether it's biotech, whether it's retail, try to understand what is special and unique about your area and then focus on building an ecosystem around that.